All right, we're on part 2 of the principles of the U.S. Constitution. So we finished up with checks and balances, and now we're going to look at the principle called federalism. So what federalism is a sharing and dividing of power among state and local governments. So the federal government isn't going to do all of the stuff. They're going to share some of the responsibilities of being the government. And then some of the stuff they say is going to be exclusively them. It's just theirs. Some stuff's going to go to the states. So some stuff they share, some stuff they're going to divide up. So the national government has powers that they use to carry out this principle of federalism. So federalism is the principle. How they go about doing it are going to be like these powers. So they have delegated, enumerated, express powers. That's one. The next one they have would be like concurrent powers. Those would be powers they share. Reserved powers are only powers given to the state. And then you have implied powers. And those are the ones that allow flexibility, another one of our principles. So something that the government does not share, like the federal U.S. national government, they do not share delegated, enumerated, express powers. These are things that only the federal government has the power to do. So these are actually written in our Constitution. So these are powers that Congress has. That's Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. So things that only the federal government can do would be like to declare war. All right, you have 50 states. So if the states were able to declare war, think about the chaos. So North Carolina and South Carolina don't agree on barbecue. North Carolina doesn't agree with the West on barbecue. Like North Carolina's barbecue is pork. Texas's barbecue is beef. Okay? So if the states could declare war, it would be chaos. And when you have war, it's your entire country going to war. So that's why only the federal, our national government, can do it. The next thing that only the federal government can do is create or coin money. So that means make your money. So your dollars, your 20s, your 5s, your 10s, all the change that is coining or creating money are also called currency. Okay? So only the federal government can do that. That's why you can travel in the United States and you can use the United States dollar. A long time ago, when we were under our first government Articles of Confederation, they didn't do that. Every state had its own dollar. And so it was just a real mess when you were talking about trading between South Carolina and North Carolina. So when we were trying to buy stuff, you actually had to do a currency exchange like you would have to do in Europe. So we don't do that under the U.S. Constitution. Under our Constitution, everybody has the same dollar in our country. Now, if you go travel overseas, you're going to have to take your U.S. dollar and trade it for whatever their money is. So, see, we don't do that. We just have one U.S. dollar, and it works. But only the federal government prints that money. Only the federal government runs our post office. That's why it's called the United States Post Office. They run that. So states don't have their own little post offices and stuff like that. So when you go to the post office in North Carolina, you are technically on federal land and federal territory. That's U.S. government run. That's why when you buy a stamp, and they're 55 cents today, if you buy a stamp, you don't pay a sales tax to the state of North Carolina. It is a government-owned, operated thing. It's listed as a power that they can do, and it's not anything that they share. Okay. So the next part of federalism is like reserved powers. Reserved powers are powers that were not given to the government. So our national government doesn't have these things. So if it's not mentioned to the federal government, it's going to go to the state, like the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina actually runs your education system. Okay. That's why when you look at North Carolina's education program, it's different than other states. Like in North Carolina soon, we're going to have a new like social studies program, but right now every kid has to take world history, American 1, American 2, and American history, founding principles of civics and economics. You have to take that. Soon, we're going to switch to world history, American history, government, and then personal financing and economics. But that is a state thing. The federal government just says, hey, here are things that you should be doing. If you'd like our money, you got to follow it. Okay? But states run education. It was never in the Constitution to do education, so it goes to the state. Same thing with elections. Elections are state things. So the state of North Carolina runs our elections. They create the ballots. They do all that. They count the votes. They report their findings to the federal government. But states, that's a reserved power for elections. Concurrent powers are powers that both the federal or national government and state governments actually share. So like taxes. Oh, and I mean this is the one that, you guys are experiencing the most because you're working your jobs and you're seeing your poor little paycheck dwindle down to less, okay, and less. Because the federal government, the US government is taking their chunk, and then the state of North Carolina is going to take their chunk. So you have to pay federal and state tax. But, oh, you're not even done there. You live in the city of Fayetteville or the city of Hope Mills. You're also paying a sales tax to them. You pay county property taxes. So taxes are something that is shared between our national and state governments. So it's a shared power. All right. Courts is a shared power. So we have federal courts like the U.S. Supreme Court, but we also have a North Carolina Supreme Court. So you have the United States District Courts, but you also have North Carolina District Courts. So courts, the ability to create courts, so you can go about interpreting the law and making certain the law is being enforced right. That's a federal and state shared power. We also have implied powers. So implied powers is going to let us get into the next principle, the principle of flexibility. So when you think about powers, it enables the government to do their job of federalism, of sharing and dividing up the responsibility of running and operating this country. And it takes a lot. Like when you think about the country in the beginning, in 1789, and you think about our country today, it's very different. Not just size of our country, but needs of our people has changed. So the last principle of the Constitution is flexibility. So flexibility is the government has the ability to change with time. Our government has to respond to differences in our country. So 1789 is a long time ago. Our country is not the same. So they have to have this implied power. So implied powers allows the government to take something that's actually written and they can use it to create something else. So we have amendments. Amendments is a great way to change the Constitution. They don't happen all that often because there's only 27 of them. So that's one way to change the Constitution. Executive orders is another way. So in executive orders, only the president can use these things and they will act as a law. So that's another way he can change the Constitution. So when we looked at executive orders, President Truman's executive order to desegregate the military, that was a law that got carried out because he decided that this nation needed to desegregate. We needed to integrate our military. Now, he does that in the late 1940s. Congress doesn't do it. Congress is so against it. And it takes until the 1960s to actually get Congress to start doing things like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So that would be one way that we have changed it. Another way is like these implied powers. So, for example, it is written in the Constitution that the government is supposed to provide for our common defense. That's a delegated, enumerated, express power. So, when 9/11 happened, the government decided that they would create the Department of Homeland Security. That is a government use of an implied power. Coining currency, making money, is written, but creating the bank would be a flexibility or an implied power. So like when you get your paycheck, what are you going to do with it? You can't cash it, it's just a check. What you have to do is you have to go to the bank, or you have to go to somebody like one of these money lending services, but that's a bank. So the government decided that they could create a bank using an implied power. Same thing with universal health care. So if you're supposed to provide for the well-being of Americans, because it's in the Constitution, well, maybe Americans needed to go ahead and have health care or medical care provided for them. So here are those principles again, just to kind of refresh you on the 6 different principles that we looked at. I hope it helped.